We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the radio show discussing the honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome back to Illinois Rising. I'm Pat Hughes, the Illinois Opportunity Project, filling in for the great Dan Proft this week. And joining me is my good friend and colleague, Jacob Huebert, Jacob Senior Counsel at the Liberty Justice Center. And Jacob, regulations in the city, in the state, they are the types of things that a small business person has to deal with, and oftentimes sort of the barrier to entry for a business in order for them to get going. And we had a circumstance in the city of Chicago with a person who owned a business, wanted to get a license so that she could sell goods out of her car. And apparently there was a process for this, that you could apply for this license, peddler's license. But this particular person had to go over a year to get a license. And tell the listeners that you run into this stuff quite a bit in the city and in the state. Tell the listeners sort of how this sort of regulatory environment operates and why it's like this.
There's so many hoops that entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs have to jump through to start a business in Chicago or in lots of other cities across Illinois. They make you get licenses that take a long time. The applications take a long time to process. Sometimes they deliberately put barriers in the way. As you know, we represented some guys who ran a food truck who wanted to operate in Evanston, and there was a law there that just kept them out because it said you could only have a food truck there if you already own a restaurant there. And so we had to bring a lawsuit that got the city of Evanston to finally repeal that regulation, and they still haven't got their application granted. And we started that process about 4 years ago. So people have a terrible time getting going with a business, and so it's no wonder that Illinois' economy is struggling so much when you have to go through all this government red tape before you can even serve customers, let alone do all the other things you have to do to succeed.
Right, and our next guest, Rebecca Mueller, owns and operates a business called North and Hudson, and it's a mobile fashion boutique, and she just started business last month because it took her, and she'll be on the show in just a second, took her over a year or about a year to get a license. And so I want to talk to her about that process and how things are going. So Rebecca, welcome to the program.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hey, take us through sort of the process, right? You struggled to get a business license so that your business could operate, and it took a year. Take the listeners through sort of what happened there.
Well, I started applying in April of 2015, and then the emerging business permit was issued in June of 2016.
Yeah, and so it had to be frustrating, right? I mean, waiting that long. What were the hoops you had to jump through? Why was it taking so long? What did the city tell you?
I really never knew. I wasn't exactly sure what was taking so long. I just really knew that it was taking that long. I wouldn't say that my problem was really jumping through a lot of hoops. My problem was more just waiting.
And did anyone ever tell you why it's such a long wait to get a license from City Hall?
No, I was never really sure. I had the Institute for Justice was kind of explaining the process because they had gone through this before with some of the food trucks, and they were kind of translating eventually, and that was in September of 2015, they began helping me, and that really began to move the process along faster, even though it still took a while. After 2015, it wasn't until June that I received the license. So yeah, it was pretty much a waiting game.
So you wrote about your experience in Crane's Business Chicago. You had an op-ed in there recently describing what you had to go through. What kind of reactions have you got to that article?
The city has been very responsive.
Now they're responsive.
Yeah, now they're very responsive. They have come down and they've talked to me. They've come to my truck at Daily Plaza when I'm parked out there, and they did listen to my story and kind of what I went through. I wasn't sure when it was going to be licensed, so that it was very hard for planning purposes. I would do things very differently depending on when the license was going to be issued, and they listened to it and they said hopefully at the end of the summer, when you've been up and running, you can do a better article about how you have been supported by the city. And I feel like they have given me more dates at Daily Plaza, and they have been, I think, really trying to work with me ever since the article.
So if you're going to give entrepreneurs who are starting a business, or maybe a business like yours where you need to go get that particular kind of license, aside from, writing an op-ed in a big journal that people will read and put pressure on the city, which everyone obviously can't do, and the city's not going to react that way to every person who does that or tries to apply for a license, what advice could you give to someone to sort of hopefully streamline that process, put pressure on the city to do the right thing? If you were to do it all over again, what advice would you give?
I would get the license first before I ever made any investment. Before you spend any money, I would just make sure that you go in and do the research and really have a firm timeline of how long this licensing is going to take, because you might as well keep the cash before you have it just sitting there for an indefinite amount of time.
What a shame that that's the best advice that there can be, that just don't even bother until you get your license, and don't make any money, don't move forward, and you just have to sit still. And of course, that is good advice. It is sound advice not to have your money sunk into something that the city might not let you do at all. But how terrible for entrepreneurship in the city of Chicago that nobody can get started with a business unless bureaucrats decide to act. There was things that I did do like on the weekends, but I couldn't really operate the way I really needed to Monday through Friday. I would basically have to wait for an event to happen, like a festival or something like that. So that was really putting me at a lot of risk, because I was only really able to open for 2 days, as opposed to 7 days a week like any normal business would. And then it was very weather dependent on those 2 days, and I would have to make a very big investment for the weekend, say $1,000 entry fee into these festivals. So it was. I looking back on it, I did learn a lot during those weekends of how to get it up and running, but I probably would have liked to have waited until 2016 when I actually had the license.
All right. Rebecca Mueller, who's the proprietor of North and Hudson, thank you for coming on. We wish you the best of luck in your new business. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Jacob, that comment that you just made to Rebecca was spot on, which is, an entrepreneur can't get going until the government gives them their blessing, and then the government takes a year to give them their blessing. There is no wonder why we can't create jobs, which are created almost exclusively, people don't realize this, by small businesses. There's no wonder we can't grow our economy if these types of regulatory barriers are in place.
Yeah, I just marvel that there's any new businesses in Chicago at all, given what they have to go through. It's a real testament to the determination of the entrepreneurs that do serve us in the city of Chicago.
I say this all the time. I grew up here. This is my home. Other than when I went away to school, I've lived here. It is a wonderful, wonderful area, and it's a wonderful, wonderful city. And nothing says more about how wonderful it is in terms of its people and its infrastructure and sort of the business community and the talent and the universities and everything else, than that the government is so backwards and so corrupt and so willing to take and take and take and pay to play and everything else, and yet people are still willing to go through that to be part of it. That, to me, is a testament to the people of the city and the area, and a testament to how wonderful of a place it is. Imagine, Jacob, what it could be like if it was run properly.
Yeah, I already think it's America's greatest city. I just can't even imagine how great it would be if this government just got out of the way.
Yeah, and I think that's not going to happen. Emmanuel's not up for re-election in 2019. As you know, in my private life, I'm a Republican. I'd love to see it's a nonpartisan race, but I'd love to see a sort of a right thinking in terms of economic issues, in terms of business entrepreneurship, giving people a path to entry into business, streamlining regulation, lowering barriers of entry like taxes, like fees, so that we could really get the economy humming in Chicago, and then the economy here would match how wonderful everything else is. And I have some hope that maybe by 2019 the political environment will be possible because people are going to say, look, we're near bankrupt, we're downgraded on our bond ratings, we owe this money to all these pensioners, and that maybe there's hope for that to happen. I hope that's the case, but we're still a long way from 2019.
Yeah, that's right, and hopefully we won't. The city won't go in a worse direction as it threatened to do in the last mayoral election. Hopefully, we'll have an alternative that actually doesn't have the corrupt cronyism and also doesn't have the radical socialist agenda that some of the alternatives have presented. Hopefully, we can have a real choice for real change and real economic reform next time around.